Okay, so hello everyone. My name is Nygel Santillan. I am a student of GELITPH Y06, and this is my personal synthesis of all my personal learnings in this course. So, unlike a lot of my classmates, I think they made a script. I'm not going to do that. I want this synthesis to be as natural and as free flowing as possible. So, excuse my stuttering if there is any as I tried to formulate my responses. I only have a list of points that I want to go through, so forgive me if there are long pauses sometimes. So let's begin. Let's start with the first module. First module was tradition and subversion. Ironically, for this module, we chose guide question B. I think that was the one with Oyai sa Dilim, um, which means that we were basically limited to just one material and like the definitions of like folk tales and like other things like that, or oral narratives basically. So I actually had to go through the other materials for this synthesis, and I went through some of the Philippine folk tales. And what I found really interesting was that in these Philippine folk tales, there were all of them basically had moral lessons, which I found super interesting. I read the Turtle and the Lizard, which was basically a lizard that was very hasty, very impatient, and things like that, and the turtle who was more patient and more had more foresight. And basically, the moral lesson for that story was that don't be like the lizard, don't be hasty, don't be in a rush to do things, don't be like there's what's the because I can't find the English word for it, yung atat, wag atat, parang ganun. So just have patience and things like that. I thought that was honestly really interesting. Like I forgot how like Philippine folktales would often have like moral lessons. Um, Back when I was a kid, a lot of these folktales were told to us. So it's very interesting that these were basically these the some of the stories that we have now are basically like offshoots of these like Philippine folktales. So that's quite interesting. Also, another thing that I noticed in this module was the fact that mythological creatures like yung mga white lady, like mostly like mostly like stories like that, they struggle to survive nowadays. Like I watched the video Kwentong Encanto, or the video series Kwentong Encanto, which basically covers like different mythological creatures of different Philippine stories about those, like the White Lady, Macapre, things like that, and how they have struggled to survive, but they put like a comedic twist to it. So basically, they start off the story by explaining, okay, this is this character, like the White Lady is this, da, 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 da. But now she's like a model because now no one knows her, no one sees her, no one remembers her. So now she works as like a model. Obviously, that's not necessarily true, but they put their comedic twist on it because they want to make a point. They want to make a point. Like they're basically saying that yeah, these these stories, these mythological creatures, they're being forgotten as time goes on. And to be honest, it makes me really sad because obviously these stories they have played a big part in Philippine literature, and to forget them is kind of sad. I guess one of the main reasons why we've slowly forgotten them over time is because people have grown past it, sort of. Like they don't necessarily, because obviously nowadays, if you tell the story of a white lady to someone, they're gonna be like, that's not true, and that's why people kind of forget it. Like they just don't appreciate it anymore. And that's a shame because I don't like. I wish these stories were appreciated more. You don't necessarily, obviously they're not real, diba? But I wish that people would appreciate these stories more and not forget about them because this is still technically part of Philippine history, and it's kind of a shame to forget about it. Um, Films like or like animated series like Trece, that does a really good job of keeping these stories alive and keeping them relevant in people's memories. So that's good at least. Um, another thing that was I guess my last takeaway for this module, my third takeaway for this module was some like oral narratives or types of literature can be used in a subversive nature. So I think I mentioned earlier Oyai Sidilim, because this was our guide question that we answered. Oyai Sidilim, Ella Archangel Oyai Sidilim is very much a subversive form of literature. It's subversive. I guess it's a video form. So, but originally it was, I think it was originally a comic or something of that nature. But regardless of that, the one we Oyai Sidilim we had here in this module was a video form. It was an animated like film. It's very interesting. It covers basically the story of this kid and his siblings, and their mother gets basically possessed by like this weird creature, like black baby creature. I know that sounds very weird out of context, but still. Um, Basically possessed by that, and they have to try and save her, and this girl basically tries to help them out. And it covers this basically like this relatively simple story between these characters, but that wasn't necessarily the main purpose of the story. It was obviously to tell the story of this weird mythological creature that was sucking on the, I can't say exactly what, of the mother and basically possessing her. That was also part of it. But there were in the story there were instances where uh there were some instances where some political, I would say not necessarily agenda, but like there's some political connotations sprinkled in there. Because throughout the film, you can actually see Duterte's face plastered in some like posters and things, which was very interesting. So like I think it even had like his slogan "Change is coming." So and then there was also a scene where his slogan "Change is coming" and graffitied over it was "China is coming." Obviously, that is a dig by the creators on Duterte because like there he has been criticized over you know his relationship with China and the fact that he's been like basically very passive about the things that they've done and basically very non-assertive and it's not great. So that is an example of subversive literature because the creators of this film are trying to go against like the government effectively. They're trying to like make a statement like that is criticizing the government. So I found that super interesting. The fact that they sprinkled that into the story, and one of the best lines of that film came at the end of the story. It basically what it basically like translates to or basically summarizes to is that it is not these creatures that are the main concern of the people in this poor like environment that the story was set in. It was the uncertainty of poverty that they were more afraid of, and that just hit completely different because in a way they're saying that no matter what monsters there are here, whatever creatures there are here, the main problem is the uncertainty caused by the government because they've kept us in, they've basically not helped us through this through poverty. They have not helped us through poverty. And yeah, I think that's a pretty big statement, and that's a really good example of subversive literature because it's not immediately obvious, but if you look and analyze it deeper, I think it's just so fascinating in that regard. I think that pretty much covers my module one. So I'm gonna move on to module two, which is the nation and beyond. So before I get into my three takeaways for this module, I want to first like go over like what a nation is, and a nation is like a united group of people, not a divided one. Obviously, it is comprised of different cultures and backgrounds, but regardless of that, a nation identifies itself as a single entity despite differences. Just like the Philippines, obviously we're not necessarily one race, or like we don't have necessarily all the same religions or beliefs and things like that. But we're still one nation. Um, one of the videos I saw for this module was Kangkungan by Mike De Leon. Kangkungan is like a reference to kangkong fields, or but what it basically translates to is summary executions, or basically EJKs. And obviously, that's a dig on the Duterte administration, which is being criticized over the extrajudicial killings that have taken place over Duterte's, I would say, reign of terror, but over his presidency or his term in presidency. So this Kangkungan is basically shows like the dark side of the Duterte administration, the fact that he wants to go, or like one of the things that was highlighted there is that he wanted the Philippines to transition to a federalist government. I think federalism is something that's seen in America, if I'm not mistaken. We currently have a democratic government where basically one collective unit for the whole nation, but a federalist government would basically separate the country into like certain regions and cities. But the problem with the federalist government is that a lot of like the regions here in the Philippines, they just can't sustain themselves. It's not possible. Like we're not like America where basically each state can sustain themselves. That's fine. That works for them. But we're the Philippines. We're a third world country. There's only like a few cities that there are a few regions that would survive a federalist government, and they would thrive. But then the others would have, they would not be able to survive at all. So going to a federalist government under the climate of this country at the moment is completely ridiculous, and it separates a country that is already somewhat divided, and it divides it even more. Like we need to be united. We need to be united right now because obviously we're going through a lot of things. Like we're changing presidents. Um, we're still trying to get out of the COVID pandemic. What we need right now is to be one nation, one unit, one collective society, not a divided one. So a federalist government would be just really stupid, to be honest. And it kind of, that idea basically kind of violates, like a federalist government will basically violate the meaning of a nation, which is to be one collective society. Also, like one of the things that was mentioned there was the fact that obviously the Marcos administration is coming back into power, or has been allowed back into power, and now obviously Bongbong Marcos is now our new president. But what it covers in what was stated in the film was that they were basically changing the very history of our nation, because obviously they were trying to wipe away like some instances of what happened in the past. They were trying to rewrite history, trying to make themselves look good. I don't know how much I can say because this is going on YouTube, but I think you get the picture. These are accurate accusations, but I think a lot of people realize that these are probably true. So yeah, that was an interesting take, and yeah, just a shame that that's the way they're going about things, but that's how it is. Like they're very much changing the history or the meaning of our nation right in front of our eyes. We can't do anything about it, unfortunately. One of the other videos in the module was a series of videos by the now unfortunately disgraced Nas Daily, where it showed basically like, the first video was like, oh, the Philippines is so cheap, like you can buy beer for like 20 pesos, or like, oh, you get a haircut for like this amount, and this and this. And what you realize is that yes, we look like this country is very cheap for outsiders, for foreigners. If you're American, you're gonna be like, oh, this is so cheap, this is so cheap. But if you live here, like, it's not cheap because we are so poor. We are so poor. Like I don't, unfortunately, thankfully for me, I'm part of the middle class, upper middle class, or middle class. So I don't necessarily, have problems with the way the things are priced, for the most part. But I think about the people who are poor and have struggled with money, and obviously for them, this, that's not cheap. That's not cheap. It looks cheap for other countries because they're rich, but it's just a matter of perspective. Like, because we earn so little, our minimum wage is like abysmal compared to like other countries. So yeah, it's just such an interesting like take and like perspective. Like outside 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 looking in, oh, like cheap. If you're in part of the Philippines, you know what's going on, then realize no, these things aren't cheap. It's just because people can't afford these things. That's why they're so cheap. So it's quite unfortunate. And just to like exemplify that takeaway, um, is my last takeaway for this module is based on the video Pagpag, which basically shows the reality of poverty in this country. Like they were basically getting food out of like trash dumps and basically repurposing that into food that can be served to people. And looking at that, obviously you think that's like someone in my position, you think that's disgusting. Why would you do that? That's absolutely vile. But then you realize that do they really have much of a choice? No, they don't. You don't have much of a choice if you're poor. Like you have to eat this kind of things, and the fact that they've been able to make use out of or make good of such a horrible situation, or like try to make the best rather out of this situation that they were dealt with is, it shows like the resiliency of the people in this country. So yeah, it's this module has really opened my eyes as to how bad the poverty situation is and how poorly run our government is. But these things happen. So yeah, those are my three takeaways from that module. So I think we can move on to body and desire. So my first takeaway is to actually, before I get into my first takeaway, I actually wanted to talk about this like the like my story before this module, because you know like this module is mainly to do with LGBT stuff, and I'm not necessarily part of that community. I'm not saying I don't support it. I am I very much support people who are part of that community. But as someone who isn't part of that community and doesn't really know much, I was kind of scared. Like, oh, like, am I going to be able to say anything about gender? Because I've never had questions about my sexuality, or I haven't explored, but like I'm pretty confident. Like I'm pretty set. I'm pretty set that I'm straight. So I was kind of concerned. Like, can I write? Could I like? Am I gonna have a hard time writing for this module? But surprisingly enough, I actually had a really great time like reading the stuff, or watching some of the stuff in this module, and writing up my parts in the group paper. But yeah, so my first takeaway mainly to do with the poem "He Who Sleeps in My Lap," and it shows basically like how hard it is for some people to come out because of the bigoted traditions we still have, and this old way of thinking, like, oh, same-sex relationships doesn't work, you can't do it. No, like it's like it's a shame, because like the main persona in that poem is clearly gay, and he has a male friend who is straight, and is saying that, oh no, like I don't no gay, like I don't like gay people, or I don't like, no, that's wrong. Like, and it's kind of sad to think that these situations exist. And it just shows like why people are afraid to come out, is because people still have these old, like, archaic beliefs that this is like wrong, and we kind of need to move past that. Like, I understand, like, like religion plays a part in that, obviously, because obviously the church will play, the church somewhat plays a part in this, but you kind of need to look past that. Like it doesn't matter if you're gay or not. Like you're still a person. Like you still deserve to be treated like a person. So yeah, unfortunate that things like this still exist. I guess my other takeaway would be to do with the bench ad, which is how long can you keep a secret? This is a very interesting ad, and it also basically compounds like the difficulties of like coming out, but this time it's not to a friend, it's or to a crush, because the first one was towards a crush. This is towards your parents. You know, the male character had a hard time, like just very is closeted basically. Um, and he didn't tell his dad that he was gay, and he was just trying to hide it constantly. It was like every time like he would talk to his dad, he'd be like, "Oh, I'm like normal like guy," and then as soon as like that dad goes away, it just turns into this like very flamboyant, almost like stereotypically gay persona. I don't know. I don't necessarily know if that sounded offensive, but please don't take that the wrong way. But yeah, it just shows like also like it's still very hard for some people to come out to their families, and it's hard. It's hard for some people, and understandably so. They don't want to be judged by their parents. They don't want to be disowned or things like that. Yeah, it kind of like opened my eyes regarding that. And then I guess my last takeaway would have to do with changing partners. Um, this is a musical film that basically covers like different relationships, mainly to do with an older and younger, or like an older and younger person as a couple. So basically, what happens in this like musical film thing that I definitely had to watch legally, quote unquote. Um, basically, it keeps switching. Like you start off, like I think it starts off with like the main, like there's like this young guy and then an older woman. Then it's an older guy and a younger woman, and then it starts switching. And then it's the young woman and the older lady, and it's like the older man and the younger man. They're all in like relationships, but they're all like completely separate. Like they're all like four different. It's basically four different stories. But what I found interesting was that despite like whatever like the sexuality or orientation they were, because it was still like the same four characters, but it was basically just different perspectives, different stories, completely separate of each other, and different like relationships that were being formed. But what I found interesting was that it was in respect like regardless of their sexuality, there was still like one main issue that remained. It was basically the insecurity that was formed with the older and younger couples, because the older ones in the relationship were like, oh, like I'm so insecure, like because the younger one might be looking for someone younger, or like maybe I'm just a fling, or maybe like this is it, this is my last shot. And they feel very insecure because of that. The younger ones are like, the younger ones in the relationship, they're like, oh, this older person is like basically strangling me, like I can't be me, like they just say, like they're very much more free spirited, and the older people in the relationship are just like, I just want to settle down already because this might be my last shot. So that kind of like disagreement, because of that, disagreements arise, and ultimately relationships end. But it was basically that basically happened this regardless of like their sexuality. Basically it was basically saying that it doesn't matter what sexuality you are, you're gonna go through issues. Like you're not special, you're not necessarily special because you're straight or you're gay. Like you still go through like the normal couple issues. And I thought that was like a pretty like interesting message. Like it wasn't just like showing like like the gay couple are the happiest and the straight couple are like like the sad one, like that's like some like films would do sometimes, which is slightly weird. They really showed like the dynamic. It was just like it was like they looked at the relationships equally despite their sexuality. So that was a very interesting um takeaway that I had there for that specific film. So that basically covers all three modules. I think I basically had three takeaways for each of those modules. So hopefully you enjoyed that. So I'm gonna go with three general takeaways from now for the other activities that we had. So we had elements of fiction where we look at the characters, the point of view, whether it's third person or third person limited, third person omniscient, types of irony, which brings me on to my first takeaway. um there was like irony, like how I was like interested how irony was used in like some of the stories, like for example in Cougar, like there was situational irony, because like the cougar has spent all this time trying to get herself like looking pretty, and this young guy just just shoots her down and is like, can I get your senior card? Do you have his like a senior card, please? And it was like it was so funny to me. That was like a great example of situational irony. I thought that was just that was pretty interesting. Dramatic irony was used in like at the train station, because the mother was like saying certain lines that obviously like the kid didn't understand, like I could kill someone or like something like that. And obviously we know what that means. We know that she basically wanted the husband to die because like they had broken up. And the kid didn't understand that because he was just a kid. But that was an example of dramatic irony. I thought those were two of the most interesting examples, and I guess that's one of my main takeaways from that activity. Um, Also, another takeaway was in understanding the personas in poems or even songs. Um, Explaining, and I didn't like we can separate basically that into like three parts, right? So you need to explain or identify like the situation of persona. You need to describe the persona themselves, rather. That was first. And if you have to know if the situation was resolved in that poem or song. So I guess my main takeaway from that activity was that you can't identify the gender of the persona based on like who's like, for example, when someone's singing, you can't identify that person via who's singing. So if you're listening to a song sung by a guy, that doesn't necessarily mean the persona in the song is a guy. It could be anyone, because if it's not stated explicitly in the lyrics who is singing, then effectively it's genderless. Like in Miss Kita Pag Tuesday, there was no clear indication as to what gender was singing. Even though it was a guy singing, there was no real indication of who was singing. It was just someone singing, like about their crush, and like how they missed their crush because they were hanging out with their boyfriend. And even the gender, what in gender of the crush wasn't even like necessarily explicitly stated. So that's an interesting takeaway I had there. I guess my last takeaway was more to do with it was more to do with the personal thing for me, because when we were doing friend of mine in the in that activity, I found it really interesting as to what it actually meant, because this is a song that I'd listened to when I was pretty young. Like my mom would sing it all the time around the house, and I didn't realize that actually meant that like it was like unrequited love. I didn't realize that it was the singer was basically singing about the person they love, but they knew that they couldn't be with them. But then by the end of the song, they had accepted it. So like I just want to be your friend, and like some things like that. I thought that was interesting. I guess that's my last takeaway for the general takeaways. And guess we can move on to one of the last parts of the synthesis. Is how do you see your learning and insights from GELITPH contributing to your development as an individual and member of society? Um, well, if you look at it from like the outside looking in, if you like you take this subject completely out of context, I'm pretty sure you're gonna be like, oh, like how is this like useful to you, like in like for like engineering, or like how is this useful for you as like, anything, like you don't really need it, like so things like that. And obviously that, and like being like having taken this subject, I realized, yeah, that's not the case. Like this subject is like really really important. This is a very interesting subject that I'm actually really glad that I've managed to experience it. Obviously, like my takeaways from like the three main modules, like the how powerful subversive literature is, and sexuality is like something that people still struggle with, or like the our nation is being skewed, the meaning of our nation is being skewed right in front of our eyes. Those are all three takeaways, or like some of the takeaways I had in those modules, right? I think that in itself is like great learnings that I can take, um and take that into my future. Like those are great takeaways that I can use for future purposes. um but it's not just those like takeaways that I mentioned earlier, but I feel as though we don't necessarily appreciate literature for what it is. We just, oh, like, or even like films and stuff like that. I feel like we don't appreciate it as much because we look at it surface level and like, oh, okay, that's not, oh, like, oh, like this. We never look at it like deeply. Okay, what does it mean? What is it? What is it? Why do we? What is the persona? What is the purpose of this? What is it trying to say? I've always been someone who wants to look deeper into things. So I think this subject really like helped me out in that regard, like to look at literature or like arts more critically, like oral narratives more critically, um, and analytically. So I found that super interesting because I'm able to appreciate like some of the songs, some of the works in a more like I'm able to just appreciate more in general, to be honest, because I know like, oh, what are they trying to say? What are they trying to imply and things like that. I think that in itself is great, and the I really appreciate that notion. I really appreciate learning about literature, and I think in the future I'm definitely gonna look at literature in a different way. I'm definitely not gonna be like, oh, just surface level and then read past it. That was, I think in the future I'm gonna definitely gonna look at literature more critically, like what we've done here. So I think that's gonna be an interesting part of my life in the future. And hopefully that will help me grow as an individual. I think, yeah, just learning to look at things more critically is something I can work on as an individual. So I think that pretty much covers my synthesis. I didn't realize that my synthesis would probably be as long-winded as it is. Um, but yeah, I think that covers it. So I'm going to conclude this synthesis. Thank you so much for listening. Sir, if you are listening to this, which I assume that you are, thank you for this term. It's been great. I've genuinely had a great experience, and I've appreciated all the learnings that I've had in this course. So thank you for teaching us. Thank you for giving us so much insight in a lot of things. And yeah, that's it. Thank you for watching, everyone. Goodbye.